What if the show that ran longer than the actual war it depicted almost got canceled after its first season? Or that the cast found out a beloved character was dying the same way the audience did, with no warning and no time to prepare? MASH looked like a comedy about army surgeons in Korea. But over 11 seasons, it became something the networks had never agreed to make, and the cast had never been promised. The stories behind those 11 years are worth knowing. Here are 15 weird facts about MASH 1972 you didn't know. Factor 15. The show ran more than 3 times longer than the war. MASH is set during the Korean War, which began in June of 1950 and ended with the armistice in July of 1953. The war lasted 3 years and 1 month. The television series that dramatized it premiered on September 17, 1972, and aired its final episode on February 28, 1983. The show ran for 11 years and approximately 5 months. The fictional version of the conflict lasted more than 3 times longer than the actual conflict it depicted. This is one of those facts about MASH 1972 that becomes stranger the longer you sit with it. The characters who were supposed to be enduring the Korean War were still enduring it while the Vietnam War began, escalated, peaked, and ended. They were still there when disco arrived and faded. They were still operating in a tent hospital in 1952 when personal computers were becoming a household conversation. The production team was aware of the irony and occasionally addressed it in interviews, but never tried to compress the timeline or rush the show toward a conclusion the real war had already reached. The stories kept coming, the writers kept finding new angles, and the fictional 4077th stayed active long after the historical unit it was based on had packed up and gone home. The finale that eventually ended the show in 1983 drew more than 125 million viewers, according to reports at the time, a number that stood as the record for the most watched single television episode in American broadcast history for decades. A show about a war that lasted 3 years produced an ending that required 11 years to reach, and an audience that stopped everything to watch it arrive. The gap between the war's actual length and the show's running time is the simplest possible measure of how far MASH had traveled from its original premise by the time it was done. Before moving ahead, take a quick second to subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for the next story. Fact 14. Alda never had to audition when the producers of MASH were casting the role of Hawkeye Pierce. They had a specific and somewhat unusual quality in mind. They wanted someone flamboyant and personable rather than the stoic, square-jawed military type that American audiences typically expected from any story set in wartime. The character as written was irreverent, emotionally expressive, and openly opposed to the authority structures he was embedded in. Finding the right person to carry that for a network television series was not straightforward. Alda's name came up, and the producers made a decision that almost never happens in television casting. They decided he was the right person without asking him to audition. Alda was brought in and offered the role directly, bypassing the standard process that puts every other actor in a waiting room with sides from the script. He did not read for the part, he simply received it. Among the weird facts about MASH 1972, this confidence was justified across 11 seasons, 4 Emmy Awards for acting, and the writing and directing contributions Alda made to the show as it evolved. He became so central to the series that the later seasons were shaped substantially by his creative input. Alda has noted in interviews that Hawkeye's personality had roots in the burlesque entertainment world he grew up around, which gave him a specific entry point into the character's particular combination of humor and emotional availability. That background informed a performance nobody else was ever asked to give. The casting process for one of the most defining television roles of the 1970s consisted of the producers deciding they already knew who they wanted and then calling him. Alda showed up and did the work for 11 years, which was the only audition the role ever received. Fact 13. The show nearly got canceled after its first season. MASH premiered in September of 1972 to critical appreciation and audience indifference. the show placed 51st in the ratings during its first season, which is a number that in any normal circumstance would have ended a series. CBS had a difficult decision to make about a show that everyone working in television seemed to recognize as genuinely distinctive, but that a majority of viewers were not finding. The network made a scheduling decision that changed everything. For the second season, MASH was moved to Saturday nights, where it followed All in the Family, which was at that point one of the most watched programs on American television. The audience that was already sitting in front of their sets for Archie Bunker simply stayed there for the show that came after. MASH went from 51st to the second most watched program on television within a single season. Among the weird facts about MASH 1972, this time slot change is the most consequential scheduling decision in the show's history and possibly one of the most consequential in the history of American television. The show that would eventually produce the most watched single episode ever broadcast nearly ended after 12 months because not enough people could find it on Sunday nights. What followed the move was a decade of strong ratings, cultural influence, and an audience relationship that made the finale a national event. None of that existed in any form during the first season when the show was sitting at 51st and CBS was weighing its options. The distance between 51st place in year one and 125 million viewers in the finale is the full measure of what a time slot change and a neighboring show's audience can do for a series that deserves better than it initially received. Fact 12. CBS forced the laugh track on a show that didn't want one. The producers and writers of MASH did not want a laugh track. Their argument was straightforward. The show was set in a war zone where people were being wounded and killed. Canned laughter over material that regularly addressed death, injury, and psychological breakdown was tonally inconsistent with what the series was trying to do. The production team made this case to CBS, and CBS overruled them. Network executives in the early 1970s operated on the assumption that audiences needed laugh tracks to understand they were watching a comedy. MASH premiered with a laugh track over most of its material because the network would not agree to remove it entirely. The compromise the producers negotiated was that the operating room scenes would be exempt. Surgical sequences, where the reality of war was most directly visible, would play without canned laughter covering them. Among the weird facts about MASH 1972, the laugh track situation evolved as the show's standing with CBS improved. As the seasons progressed, the track was used less frequently and with decreasing volume. The BBC, which aired the show in the United Kingdom, broadcast it without any laugh track at all, which created a noticeably different viewing experience that many people who encountered those versions found more consistent with the show's actual tone. DVD releases of the series offered viewers the option to watch without the laugh track, which effectively gave the show a second version of itself available to anyone who preferred the quieter cut. The network got what it wanted in 1972. The show gradually took back what its producers had originally argued for, one season at a time, until the laugh track had become almost incidental to the way most people experienced MASH in its later years. Fact 11. The outdoor set was destroyed by a real wildfire. The exterior scenes of MASH were filmed on location in the mountains near Malibu, California, at a site that provided the right combination of scrubby terrain and open space to suggest a military installation in Korea. The production used this location consistently across the show's run, and it became a familiar visual backdrop for audiences who watched over 11 seasons. On October 9, 1982, as the series was wrapping its final production period, a sweeping brush fire moved through the area and destroyed most of the outdoor set. The tents, the equipment, the physical structures that had represented the 4077th for a decade were gone. The timing placed the fire directly in the path of the show's final episodes, which still needed outdoor material to complete. Among the weird facts about MASH 1972, the writers made a creative decision that turned a production disaster into a narrative one. Rather than rebuilding the set for the remaining episodes or finding a way to film around the damage, they incorporated the destruction directly into the story. In the finale, the 4077th camp is destroyed by enemy bombs, forcing the unit to evacuate. The physical reality of what the fire had done to the actual location became the dramatic conclusion of the fictional story set there. The site today is part of Malibu Creek State Park. Some of the original set locations remain visible and accessible to visitors who want to walk the ground where the Forfeo 77th was stationed for 11 years of television. A wildfire that could have derailed the show's ending instead provided it with the most natural possible conclusion. The camp that had housed the characters across the entire run of the series was destroyed in reality and in fiction simultaneously. Fact 10. Henry Blake's death was hidden from almost the entire cast when McLean Stevenson decided to leave MASH at the end of the third season. The writers made a decision about how to handle his departure that was unusual enough to remain one of the most discussed production choices in the show's history. They wrote an ending for Henry Blake's character that nobody on the cast except Alan Alda and Gary Berghoff knew about until the day it was filmed. The script for the episode was distributed without its final page. The cast performed all of their scenes through the episode without knowing what the conclusion would be. At the end of the shooting day, the writers handed out the final page. It contained the scene where Radar enters the operating room and announces that Henry Blake's plane home has been shot down over the Sea of Japan with no survivors. The cast's reaction to that information in the filmed scene was genuine. They had not had time to process it, rehearse their responses, or decide how their characters would receive the news. What appeared on screen was the actual first response of people encountering something they had not been prepared for. Among the weird facts about MASH 1972, the scene was filmed in 2 takes and remains one of the most effective moments in the show's entire run. The abruptness that audiences responded to so strongly came directly from the abruptness with which the cast had experienced it. CBS received significant viewer complaints after the episode aired. The audience had expected a comedy to send its departing character home safely. The show gave them something closer to what war actually does to people, and did it without warning, which was exactly how the production team had arrived at it themselves. Fact 9. Wayne Rogers quit without telling anyone Trapper John McIntyre was Hawkeye's closest friend and comedic partner through the first 3 seasons of the show. Wayne Rogers played the character and then abruptly left MASH after season 3 without giving the production much advance notice or explanation. His stated reason was dissatisfaction with how the character had been developed, feeling that Trapper had become increasingly reactive and secondary compared to Hawkeye rather than developing his own distinct identity. Rogers had also challenged his contract in legal proceedings, arguing that the agreement was not enforceable in ways that the studio disputed. The details of that dispute were not widely publicized at the time, but his departure was considerably more abrupt than a planned exit would have been, leaving the production to replace a central character with minimal transition time. Among the weird facts about MASH 1972, the replacement was handled in a way that was itself unusual. The show did not write Trapper John out with a goodbye episode or a dramatic farewell. Hawkeye simply woke up one morning and Trapper was already gone, discharged and on a plane home. The new character B.J. Hunnicutt arrived the same day. Mike Farrell took over and the partnership continued with a different dynamic. The Trapper to B.J. transition is one of the more abrupt character substitutions in a major series, managed almost entirely through implication rather than dramatization. Viewers adjusted because the show gave them little choice. Farrell's B.J. was a considerably different presence than Rogers' Trapper, and the show shifted noticeably toward more emotional and less purely comedic territory in the seasons that followed. Whether Rogers' frustrations about Trapper's development had merit, the replacement that followed his exit produced some of the show's most substantive work. Fact 8. Gary Berghoff was the only cast member who carried over from the film. The 1972 television series was adapted from the 1970 Robert Altman film, which itself had been adapted from the 1968 novel by Richard Hooker, a pen name used by former Korean War surgeon H. Richard Hornberger. The film had its own cast of characters who were distinct from the television versions in tone and characterization. When CBS developed the series, the production recruited an entirely new cast for almost every role. The single exception was Gary Berghoff, who played Radar O'Reilly in the Altman film and reprised the role for the television series. Berghoff's performance in the film had established something specific about the character, a quality of innocent competence that worked differently from any of the other characters around him, and the television production wanted to preserve that continuity. Among the weird facts about MASH 1972, Berghoff remained with the show through the first 8 seasons before departing in a 2-part episode called Goodbye Radar. He has been candid in interviews about his original exit scene being unsatisfying and requiring a reshoot, which resulted in the farewell that eventually aired, being a second attempt at closing the character's story. Radar's goodbye remains one of the most emotionally effective departures in the show's run, partly because the character had been present since before the television series existed. He was the only continuous thread between the film and the show, and his exit marked the end of that direct connection to the source material. Berghoff was also dealing with personal difficulties during his final seasons that affected his relationship with the production. The combination of those circumstances and his own feelings about where the character had gone contributed to a departure that was, by most accounts, more complicated than the episode itself suggested. Fact 7. The cast voted together to end the show's television series end because someone outside the production decides they should. A network cancels, ratings fall below a threshold, or a renewal negotiation fails. MASH ended differently. By the early 1980s, the cast had discussed among themselves whether the show had exhausted what it could do with its characters and its premise, and the consensus that emerged from those conversations was that it had. The decision to end the series was made collectively, with the primary cast members agreeing that the time had come rather than waiting for external pressure to force the issue. Alda has described the atmosphere among the cast during their final seasons as one of genuine closeness, with most of them spending time together between takes in ways that were unusual for television productions, where cast members more typically retreated to separate spaces. Among the weird facts about MASH 1972, the writers had their own version of the same problem. Real Korean War veterans and surgeons had been contacting the production for years, offering experiences they thought might make good episodes, only to be told that the show had already done something similar. The well of stories specific to the setting was running dry, and the people telling them knew it. The cast voted as a group to bring the show to a conclusion while it was still working rather than let it decline into repetition. That kind of collective creative decision is genuinely rare in the history of long-running American television. The result was a finale that was treated as a national event, watched by an audience whose size had never been assembled for any single television broadcast before it. Ending on Your Own Terms produced the largest audience in the show's history. Fact 6. The pilot script was written in 3 days. Larry Gelbart was brought in to develop the television adaptation of MASH after the Altman film had demonstrated the property's potential. The speed with which he completed the initial work is not a detail that most people associate with one of the most celebrated television productions of its era. Gelbart wrote the pilot script in 3 days. The payment he received for that work was $25,000 for the episode. That number looks modest even in the context of 1972 television compensation, and it looks considerably smaller when measured against the 11-season run the pilot initiated and the cultural footprint the show accumulated over the following decade. Gelbart did not have a royalty arrangement that would have adjusted his compensation to reflect the show's eventual success. Among the weird facts about MASH 1972, Gelbart remained as the primary creative voice of the show through the first 5 seasons, shaping the comedic tone and establishing the series' identity before Alda and producer Burt Metcalf took over that role for the show's final 6 seasons. His departure marked a shift toward more dramatic material that defined the show's later period. The 3-day pilot that Gelbart produced for a flat fee became the foundation of a production that ran for 11 years, won 14 Emmy Awards, and ended with the most watched single broadcast in American television history up to that point. The contractual terms that governed his compensation for that 3-day effort did not reflect any of what came after. The pilot worked, the show was ordered, and Gelbart spent 5 seasons building something whose scale nobody could have projected from what he delivered in 72 hours. Fact 5. The cast wore sneakers instead of combat boots' military authenticity was a consistent production value on MASH, particularly in the exterior scenes filmed on location near Malibu, where the terrain and weather conditions helped create the impression of a genuine military installation. The wardrobe department worked carefully to dress the cast in period-appropriate gear that matched what American soldiers would have actually worn during the Korean War era. One significant exception was the footwear. Combat boots, which would have been the standard issue for any character in the 477th, produced a specific problem in interior scenes that the production could not solve through any other means. The loud, hard clunking of boot heels on wooden floors created audio problems that interfered with the dialogue recording and required costly post-production work to correct. The solution was to have the cast wear sneakers instead of combat boots for the scenes where sound was an issue. Camera operators were instructed to shoot characters from the waist up in situations where the footwear would otherwise be visible, keeping the sneakers out of frame while preserving the audio quality the production required. Among the weird facts about MASH 1972, this practical compromise meant that the characters of one of American television's most seriously researched productions were walking around a Korean war camp in athletic shoes for 11 seasons. The attention to period detail that defined the show's visual identity stopped at the ankle in any scene where the floor made noise. Most viewers watching from their living rooms had no reason to look at anyone's feet and no way to know what they would have seen if they had. The sneakers stayed off camera and the dialogue stayed clear, which was exactly the trade the production had calculated it needed to make. Fact 4. Patrick Swayze and Ron Howard both appeared in guest roles over 11 seasons. MASH accumulated a guest cast that included some of the most recognizable names in American entertainment, most of whom appeared before they had reached the level of fame that would make their appearances retrospectively striking. The show was a prestigious credit during its run and attracted serious performers who wanted to be associated with it. Ron Howard appeared as an underage Marine, a guest role that placed him on the same set as Alan Alda years before Howard had established himself as a director. Patrick Swayze appeared as a soldier diagnosed with leukemia, a dramatically demanding role that the future star of Dirty Dancing and Ghost took on while still building his career. Leslie Nielsen, who would later become famous for pure comedy in the Naked Gun films, appeared in a straight dramatic role as a colonel, demonstrating the range he possessed before the comedy parts came to define him publicly. Among the weird facts about MASH 1972, these guest appearances form a catalog of careers that were either in early development or mid-transition when they passed through the 4077th. The show served as a kind of proving ground for performers at different stages, offering serious material to anyone who wanted to work with the production. The guest roster accumulated across 11 seasons reflects how consistently MASH attracted talent that the broader industry recognized as worth seeking out. The show's reputation for taking its material seriously made it a destination rather than a detour for performers at any level. Howard eventually directed films that defined American cinema across multiple decades. Swayze became a global star. Nielsen reinvented himself completely. They all spent time at Malibu Creek first. Fact 3. Real veteran stories were rejected for being too similar to existing episodes from. Early in the production, the writers of MASH made a commitment to grounding the show's storylines in actual Korean War experiences. They conducted interviews with veterans, surgeons, nurses, and civilians who had served in or near combat zones, gathering material that could be adapted into episodes. The research shaped the show's tone in ways that distinguished it from other fictional treatments of wartime and gave individual episodes a specific weight that pure invention rarely achieves. The relationship between the production and the veteran community became a consistent creative resource across the show's run. Korean War doctors and medical personnel reached out regularly to offer their own experiences, believing their stories might provide material the show had not yet covered. The writers welcomed these contacts and worked through the submissions looking for usable material. By the later seasons, the writers were regularly turning down veteran contributions for a reason that reflected how thoroughly the show had mined the territory it was working in. The stories being offered were too similar to episodes that had already aired. The production had covered enough ground that genuine first-hand accounts of Korean War medical experience were being rejected because MASH had already told a version of that story. Among the weird facts about MASH 1972, this was one of the clearest signals that the show had reached natural exhaustion. Harry Morgan, who played Colonel Potter from Season 4 onward, acknowledged in later interviews that the creative strain was visible to the cast by the 9th season. The show that had built its credibility on real stories eventually ran out of real stories it had not already told. That limit, reached through 11 years of thorough research and continuous production, was as good a measure as any of how completely the show had done what it set out to do. Fact 2. BJ's daughter was renamed after Mike Farrell's real daughter when Mike Farrell joined MASH in Season 4 as BJ Hunnicutt. The character was established as a married man with a young daughter back home in California. BJ's relationship with his family and his determination to return to them became one of the defining emotional threads of his character across the seasons. The daughter's name, as originally written in the scripts, was Melissa. Farrell made a personal request to the production. He asked the writers to change the character's daughter's name from Melissa to Erin, which was the name of his real-life daughter. The producers agreed without significant resistance, and the change was made before the character's name became established in any episode. Among the weird facts about MASH 1972, this kind of accommodation reflects the collaborative relationship that developed between the cast and the creative team as the show matured. The later seasons in particular were shaped by input from the performers in ways that were uncommon in 1970s television production, where the division between writers and actors was typically more rigid. Erin Hunnicutt appeared in the show's emotional landscape across multiple seasons as the daughter BJ was fighting to return to the person who represented everything the war was taking him away from. The name on screen was the name of Farrell's actual daughter. That detail was invisible to viewers who knew Erin Hunnicutt as a fictional child in California. For Farrell, every scene where his character expressed longing for home carried a specific resonance that the original name would not have produced in the same way. Fact 1. The finale was not the last episode filmed. The finale of MASH, titled Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen, is the most watched single television episode in American broadcast history by the figures reported at its original airing in February of 1983. It was a feature-length conclusion to 11 seasons of television, directed and co-written by Alda, and it brought the Korean War armistice and the characters' final departures together in a 2.5-hour broadcast that drew an audience of more than 125 million people. The assumption most people carry about a finale is that it was the last thing filmed. The production made a different decision about how to close out its schedule. The actual final episode shot was the penultimate installment, titled As Time Goes By, which centered on the cast burying a time capsule beneath the ground of the camp. That episode was filmed after the finale had already been completed and represents the last day the cast and crew spent on the MASH set. Among the weird facts about MASH 1972, this sequencing meant that the show's most significant production achievement, the finale watched by a record-breaking audience, was completed before the last working day on set. The time capsule episode, quiet and reflective compared to the finale's scale, was what the cast actually filmed last. The time capsule buried in that episode was a real object. It was placed beneath the Fox Studios lot during production. Whether it was ever retrieved or remains there is not part of the public record. 11 years of television, the most watched finale in American broadcast history, and the last day of work was spent burying a box in the ground. MASH ended the way it had always operated, finding the human and specific detail inside the large story and doing it without announcing what it was doing. MASH spent 11 seasons making a comedy about a war last longer than the war itself, and somewhere in that process it became something that an entire country stopped to say goodbye to. Which of these facts surprised you most? Tell us in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss one.